taking liberties with the rule of law. And I'm going to talk about, mainly, a topic I have not talked about in any of the public meetings, but I'm feeling so angry about it. And it takes a lot to get me so angry that I just almost explode. Because in court, obviously, I don't get that opportunity. You have to be very constrained, very focused, very disciplined. That's good from one point of view, but it doesn't allow you the latitude to say what you really feel. And so you'll see as I go through what this topic is that I haven't spoken about before, and why I want to speak about it today, under the heading of the rule of law. And that will develop into something that's very current, particularly in the lead up to an election which we all know is going to be May the 6th or wherever. Certainly around that day. In 1917, so don't worry, it's not John Cleese in a shoebox. In 1917, my father was part of the British Army under General Allenby on horseback, fighting Turks, the remnants of the Ottoman Empire, pushing them back from Sinai towards Palestine and Jerusalem. And in the course of writing the book, I had occasion to look up, you have those boxes of stuff that mothers and grandmothers and all the rest of it hand down, and I hadn't really ever looked at it. And I opened it for the first time really properly to have a look. And inside this box was a series of letters and then a tiny little brown diary with copper plate writing. And it described what happened to my father in Palestine. He was shot on horseback and left for dead. He was on patrol, 6 o'clock one morning. And he wrote all this up when he was in hospital. Fortunately, somebody found him. He lost one of his legs, and the other one was severely injured. So obviously through the whole of my life he was disabled. So I knew, well, I think I know what it is like for disability to affect the home and your life. But it also affected his sense of justice in a way, because his brother stayed on as part of the British mandate. And then, of course, you will remember, possibly, during the First World War, the Balfour Declaration, where, as usual, perfidious Albion is facing in two directions and saying one thing to one section, the Arab population, and another thing to the Jewish population. And the mandate itself has left a legacy that goes right through to today, which I'm going to come on to in a moment. And there was an article today in, I think, one of the broadsheets, which made a very clear and obvious point. It was an American academic that made it. It said, of all the nations in the world that have a responsibility to the rule of law, in the Middle East, in Palestine, it's the United Kingdom, even before the US. And in a sense that took me back to obviously my father's experiences, and really how he didn't often express views, but he did about what was going on, and particularly, interestingly, often forgotten, the use of terrorism to establish the Israeli state, make no mistake about it. That's what was used. British soldiers, which of course was where he was coming from, were getting killed in that process. So that was my first taste of it. Then in a way, it lay dormant. And my life has been educated by the people, in a sense, I've come into contact with. So I'm not doing it from a didactic point of view. I'm not, as it were, a card-carrying member of anything. I'm listening very carefully, observing and watching, and that's how I've learned. So it is definitely empirical. And I haven't come here to, as it were, rant and rave in that sense of the word. That I've come here to place before you my feelings of anger about a situation for which we all bear responsibility, including myself. It lay dormant until the mid-90s. Again, I put it in the book, but I represented a Palestinian, and a major trial in London, and a Lebanese woman, in relation to a bombing of the Israeli embassy in London. But it's not that I want to talk about. It's more in his context. During the case, I was being instructed by a well-known solicitor, Gareth Pearce, and I just said to her, I think I want to go to Palestine. Even though we're in the middle of the case, I want to go. I want to see what it is he's talking about. Because the case brought up all kinds of issues that he was facing then, never mind now. And so, one weekend, Yvette and myself and Gareth went to Palestine, and we met his family, or as much of it as we were allowed to meet, living in a tiny village next to a railway line, funnily enough, that my uncle had helped build in the first place. And there they were, very generous, very accommodating, very welcoming, but split. Because the father of the family lived in Ramallah and worked in Ramallah because that's where the work was. So they hardly ever saw him. Getting there, although it's half an hour by road, you're probably all aware of the checkpoints and the difficulties. The water supply, which was Roman, had been cut off by the Israelis. Been there since Roman times. The water wheel, the ducts, we saw it all. And each morning, I'm not going to go through the whole visit, it was searing as far as I was concerned. We visited a refugee camp, the diaspora, again, the right of return tends to have been forgotten, the conditions in these camps, which is right there now, with open drains in the middle of the camp. And you think people are having to live day by day by day in these conditions, unrecognised, almost forgotten, never mind those who've had to leave and go to Jordan, Egypt or anywhere else. And we also went to the hospital to see the injuries to young people. A lot of children, seriously damaged, seriously physically damaged as well as mentally. And we also went at dawn to see the helicopters that come over the hill when the young Palestinian men are trying to get work from Israelis. And then are picked up by the helicopters, prevented from going to work. If they get through, they're picked up on the way back and their money's removed. This is what's happening then. This is in the mid-90s, on a daily basis. And when you get to grips with how serious the situation is, even then, there's only one word that came to mind. And no doubt, you know, people will, well, some people might say, you know, because I say these things, I'm anti-Semitic, because there is this extraordinary prejudice that exists. If you speak the truth, that's all I'm doing, about a situation that I saw. But it moved on from there. We came back, obviously, the trial went on. But you can't forget the images that you've left behind, they live with you. And then, gradually, other things began to happen to me, which brought me in contact with the reality of Palestine.